in that upper cabinet. So the interview takes place, but what is said? Detective Smith, where's your bag with those syringes? Where's your bag where those syringes would be at now? Mr. Chernoff, oh really? Dr. Murray, I don't have them. Mr. Chernoff, I thought you left it there. Dr. Murray, yeah, I did. Detective Smith, where? Where did you leave it? Dr. Murray, in that same bedroom, in the closet, where it always stays. Conrad Murray thought the police was already in custody of those bags. He's coming forward to this interview for the self-preservation of Conrad Murray, to get ahead of the story, to put his version out there. Unfortunately, his version doesn't match up with any of the evidence. It doesn't match up with the phone records, or the text messages, or the emails. Conrad Murray put this out there because he thought the bags had already been discovered, and he knew the toxicology findings, when linked to what was found in those bags, would show that Michael Jackson died of acute propofol intoxication coupled with the contributory effect of the benzodiazepines. I want to talk about the standard of care. Should I continue, Your Honor? Through? Okay. The standard of care, ladies and gentlemen. You heard from a number of doctors in this case. The people called Dr. Alon Steinberg, Dr. Nader Kamagar, and Dr. Steve Schaefer. Dr. Alon Steinberg is a board-certified cardiologist. Nader Kamagar is a sleep expert, critical care medicine, internal medicine, pulmonary specialist. Dr. Steve Schaefer is one of the leading anesthesiologists, an expert in pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. And you heard from this cross-section of experts who came in here and told you about the standard of care. What is needed? What are the dangers? What is required? Every single doctor that testified in this courtroom told you they would never do what Conrad Murray did. Every single doctor. Because they know it could lead to death. So what did we learn? We learned that the standard of care for propofol requires a room that looks like this. A medical facility. Whether it's a hospital, a surgery suite, a medical clinic, a medical facility that has the necessary equipment, that has the personnel, that has the resuscitative equipment, that has the resuscitative drugs. This is where propofol is used, not here. Not in an upstairs bedroom, without any of such necessary equipment and care. So we know what propofol does. We know it's only used in a highly monitored setting. And we know without doubt from the people's experts that the setting represents an extreme violation of the standard of care. This is basic common sense. There's no backup. There's no emergency equipment. Propofol is not utilized in a bedroom. No one had ever heard of propofol being used in a bedroom ever until Conrad Murray did it to Michael Jackson. It's an egregious, extreme deviation from the standard of care. It is gross negligence, and it is a direct cause of Michael Jackson's death. The setting in which this was done. Had it been done in a hospital, you have the emergency equipment. You have what you need. You have personnel. You have airway management tools. This is criminal negligence. Criminal gross negligence. But we know there's multiple violations of the standard of care. We know it's not indicated for the treatment of insomnia. And you remember Dr. White put forth, or Mr. Flanagan asked the people's experts about this insomnia study. I believe it was out of Taiwan. And this post-dated Michael Jackson's death, number one. Number two, the authors of that study called it an experiment, and it needed to be further researched. It had multiple safety precautions in place, such as all the monitoring, the fasting, the exclusion of other drugs, IRB ethical approval for the study. So it was done in a setting where it had all the necessary precautions, but the authors of that study said it's an absolute experiment and needs to be studied further. It does not create a standard of care. It didn't even exist in June 2009. Propofol is in no way indicated for the treatment of insomnia. What the experts testified to is what Conrad Murray was doing was a pharmaceutical experiment on Michael Jackson. It was an experiment. If 2010 it's studied for insomnia, if in 2010 it's an experiment, it surely was an obscene experiment on June 25th, 2009 by a doctor who has no knowledge or basis of training in sleep medicine. This is an extreme deviation. This is gross criminal negligence. Continuous medical monitoring equipment. You heard a great deal about the heart monitors that are needed, the pulse oximetry, the capnography, the blood pressure. All of these things need to be constantly monitored because we know from every expert, called by the defense or the people, that bad things can happen quickly when you're using propofol. Propofol is a wonderful drug if used appropriately. Bad things can happen quickly. Respiratory depression and death. If you don't know what you're doing and you're not in the appropriate setting with the appropriate equipment. This is criminal negligence. Immediate access and the ability to use resuscitative equipment. This includes the drugs, the crash cart, defibrillator, suction apparatus, as well as the airway equipment that paramedic Blunt was able to utilize. But you don't just need to have it, you need to be able to use it. And I reference that being the ambu bag laying on the floor, which Conrad Murray never makes any mention of using. We know from the Seacoast records it hadn't even been ordered until some time, I believe in June. But you have the records back in the deliberation room. But he says he went straight to compressions and mouth-to-mouth, never once mentioning the ambu bag. No suction apparatus, no crash cart with the necessary drugs, no automatic defibrillator, none of the airway equipment one would need and require in order to safely manage an emergency as a result of propofol. This clearly is criminal gross negligence and extreme deviation from the standard of care. It requires continuous presence and monitoring. Abandonment of a patient, including just preoccupation with phone calls, texts, and emails, is abandonment of a patient. Leaving the room is obviously even worse. But you need constant visual observation of your patient. You do not leave your patient alone in this condition. There's a fundamental principle. If your concern is the patient's life, you do not leave them alone. That's why in the hospital setting we learn they have the backup personnel, all the audible equipment, all the equipment available, including people, including eyes on the patient, because bad things happen very, very quickly. Extreme criminal gross negligence. The contributory factor of the benzodiazepines. Again, in this setting, this only heightened the danger. In a hospital setting, you may be able to use benzodiazepines and propofol, but in this setting, everything is exacerbated. Everything is heightened. The risk of respiratory failure is heightened because the benzodiazepines are already working. They're already in the blood. Dr. White talked about all these variables. The reason you take the precautions you take is because you can't always predict how an individual patient will react. You can't always predict exactly how dehydrated that patient is. You can't always predict exactly the level of the benzodiazepines at a given moment. As the defense spent a great time explaining, there are variables. That is why you take the precautions you do. You don't have time to go back after the fact to say, you know what? I should have had that emergency equipment there.